The remote control. When my son moved back home after his divorce, he carried more than 2 suitcases through my front door. He carried silence, the heavy kind, the kind that fills a room even when no one is speaking. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered, once confident, once certain of himself. The kind of man who used to walk into a room and make plans for it. Now he walked into my house like a storm cloud, unsure where to reign. "I'll only stay a few weeks," he said that first evening, dropping his bags by the staircase. "Stay as long as you need," I replied. "That is what mothers say. What we mean is, I hope you heal." At first, I treated it like a temporary visit. I washed his favorite bedsheets. I made the lentil soup he used to love as a child. I left the hallway light on at night the way I had when he was afraid of the dark. But this was not the same boy. This was a man whose life had cracked open. He was broken, angry, loud. The house had always been quiet. After his father passed away 10 years earlier, silence had become a companion. I kept the television on in the evenings, mostly for the background voices. It kept loneliness from settling too deeply into the furniture. But when my son moved in, the silence changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt tense, charged. He criticized everything. "The TV is too loud. The food is too salty. Why do you keep the lights on during the day? You wouldn't understand modern life, Mom." That last one came often. "You wouldn't understand. It's amazing how quickly a sentence can shrink a person." The first week, I said nothing. The second week, I adjusted. I lowered the volume. I used less salt. I tiptoed past his door in the mornings when he slept late. I ignored the sharpness in his tone when he spoke to me. He was hurting, I reminded myself. Pain leaks. It spills into innocent spaces. He spent hours on the couch scrolling through his phone, jaw tight, shoulders hunched. Sometimes I would catch him staring at nothing, eyes red but dry. Pride wouldn't let him cry where I could see. One evening, I found him in the kitchen at midnight. He was sitting at the table in the dark, only the refrigerator light illuminating his face. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "She moved on already," he said. Posted pictures, smiling like I was nothing. I poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from him. "You are not nothing," I said. He let out a bitter laugh. "Feels like it." I wanted to reach across and hold his hand, but he had grown into someone who no longer welcomed that kind of comfort easily. So I stayed seated and listened. As weeks turned into months, his anger grew sharper instead of softer. He wasn't just hurt, he was defensive. He snapped at small things. When I asked if he wanted tea, he said, "I'm not a child." When I reminded him about a job interview, he said, "Stop managing my life." I wasn't managing, I was mothering. There is a difference, but he couldn't see it. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, he walked into the living room and frowned at the television. "Why do you watch these old shows?" he asked. "Because I enjoy them," I replied. "They're unrealistic." I smiled. So his thinking life goes exactly as planned. He didn't appreciate that. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. It had been a long day. I had spent the afternoon tending to my small garden, trimming the jasmine vines that climbed the back wall. The scent always calmed me. Inside, I prepared dinner. He barely touched it. "I'm not hungry." "You need to eat," I said. "I said I'm not hungry." The television was playing my favorite drama, one I had followed for years. The characters felt familiar, predictable in a comforting way. He sat down beside me. "We need to talk," he said abruptly. "We can talk," I replied, not taking my eyes off the screen. He reached over and muted the television mid-sentence. The sudden silence was loud. "We're talking," he said. I looked at him. "No," I replied calmly. "You are talking." His jaw tightened. "Mom, this is important." And so is what I was watching. He stared at me like he had never seen me before. Perhaps he hadn't. "You always do this," he said. "You hide behind distractions." I picked up the remote from his hand and unmuted the television. "You're not the only one who gets to decide what matters in this house." He stood up abruptly. "This is why Dad handled everything." The words landed harder than he intended, or perhaps exactly as intended. He stormed to his room and slammed the door. I sat there long after the episode ended. That was the first time I felt something new rising inside me, not anger, clarity. The next morning, I woke up early, before he did. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. For months I had told myself, he's healing, be patient. But patience does not mean surrender. Love does not mean shrinking. I walked into the living room and unplugged the Wi-Fi router. I placed it carefully in a drawer in my bedroom. Then I typed a document on my old laptop. Simple, clear, no emotion. I printed it and laid it on the kitchen table. When he came downstairs an hour later, his expression was already irritated. "The Wi-Fi isn't working," he called out. "I know," I answered from the stove. "What do you mean you know?" He stormed into the kitchen. "I have calls today, applications, I need the internet." I slid the paper across the table. He looked at it. Rent begins next month. Utilities split evenly. Respect required daily. Household decisions are shared. This is my home. He looked up slowly. "You're my mother." "And I'm an adult," I answered. His voice rose. "You can't just turn off the internet like I'm 16. And you can't mute my life like I don't matter." Silence. Real silence this time. He stared at the paper again. "You're serious?" "Yes." His anger shifted. It became confusion. "You want me to pay rent?" "Yes." "I just got divorced. And you're rebuilding. Part of rebuilding is responsibility." He paced the kitchen. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said softly. "What's ridiculous is thinking love means unlimited tolerance." He looked at me differently then. Not as a mother, as a person. That afternoon, he left the house without another word. I didn't chase him. I didn't text. I watered the plants. I vacuumed the hallway. I turned the television volume exactly where I liked it. When he returned that evening, he was quiet. He sat at the kitchen table and read the paper again. "Utilities split evenly?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "And respect required daily?" "That one is non-negotiable." He almost smiled. "Almost." "Fine," he said. "I'll pay." I nodded. "Good. And the Wi-Fi? When we both agree on the rules?" He extended his hand across the table like we were closing a business deal. "Deal." I shook it. The change wasn't instant. Growth rarely is, but it began. The first month he transferred rent into my account, he did it without comment. The second month, he started cooking dinner once a week. The third month, he fixed the loose cabinet hinge without being asked. Small things. Respectful things. We began speaking differently. He asked about my garden. I asked about his job applications without sounding like a supervisor. He found part-time work, then a better position. One evening, he sat beside me on the couch and watched my show without complaint. Halfway through, he said, "Why do you like this character?" I explained. He listened. He didn't mute the television. 6 months passed. The house felt lighter. He laughed again. Not the sharp, sarcastic laugh from before, a real one. He started going out with friends, exercising, planning. One afternoon, he came home with a folded brochure in his hand. "I found an apartment," he said. My chest tightened, but in a good way. "Is it nice?" "Small, but mine." "That's important." He hesitated. "I couldn't have done this 6 months ago." I knew that. He knew that too. The day he moved out, we carried boxes to his car together. The same driveway, different energy. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around the living room. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not letting me stay broken." I smiled. "I didn't fix you." "No," he said. "You didn't let me control you either." He stepped closer and hugged me, longer than usual, stronger. "You taught me something," he said. "What's that?" "That love doesn't mean control." I nodded. "And control doesn't mean strength." He pulled back and looked at me carefully. "You changed, Mom." "No," I said gently. I remembered who I was. After he drove away, the house returned to silence, but this silence was peaceful again. Earned. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. The remote control rested on the table. Such a small object. Plastic, buttons, power. I picked it up. I turned on the television, and I adjusted the volume exactly where I liked it. Not too loud, not too quiet, just right. Because love, I had learned, is not about lowering yourself to keep the peace. It is about standing at your full height and inviting others to rise with you. Because love, I had learned, is not about lowering yourself to keep the peace. It is about standing at your full height and inviting others to rise with you. The first week after he moved out, the house felt strangely organized. Not cleaner, not quieter, just defined. His shoes were no longer by the door. His coffee mug was no longer left in the sink. The hallway light stayed off at night. I hadn't realized how much space his presence had occupied, not just physically, but emotionally. I missed him. But I did not miss the version of him that had first walked through my door. That version had needed shelter. The one who left needed wings. 3 days after he moved into his apartment, my phone rang at 9:17 p.m. Mom? His voice sounded different. Not broken, not sharp, just uncertain. Did you eat? I asked. He laughed softly. Yes. Good. There was a pause. It's quiet here, he said. Yes, I replied. It will be. Another pause. I thought I wanted quiet, he admitted, but it's louder than I expected. Loneliness does that. It echoes. You're not alone, I said. You're just not distracted. He exhaled slowly. I almost turned the TV on just for noise. Did you? No. What did you do instead? I sat with it. That made me smile. Good. He began calling more often after that. Not every day, but regularly. The conversations were different now. Less defensive, less reactive. He asked for advice sometimes, but more often, he simply shared. One evening, he told me about assembling his own dining table. I did it wrong twice, he said. But you did it, I replied. Yeah. You see, you don't need someone to hold the instructions for you. He chuckled. You and your metaphors. I'm your mother. It's required. 2 months after moving out, he invited me to see his apartment. It was small, like he had said. 1 bedroom, narrow kitchen, a window overlooking a parking lot instead of a garden, but it was clean, organized, intentional. He had framed a few photographs, one of him as a child sitting on his father's shoulders, one of us at his university graduation, one recent one of him hiking alone. I like it, I said honestly. He looked relieved. I was worried you'd think it was too simple. Simple is peaceful. He nodded slowly. I think I used to confuse noise with importance. I raised an eyebrow. Used to? He laughed. Okay, I still do sometimes. We sat on his new couch, firmer than mine, and drank tea from mismatched mugs. At one point, he reached for the remote to turn on the television. He paused, then he looked at me. You want to watch something? I smiled. That depends. Are we talking? He grinned. No, we're watching. He handed me the remote. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Our roles continued adjusting in subtle ways. He stopped asking for permission and started asking for perspective. There is a difference. Permission seeks authority. Perspective seeks wisdom. One afternoon, he called sounding unsettled. She reached out, he said. His ex-wife. My chest tightened slightly. Oh? She wants to meet, talk. And what do you want? He hesitated. I don't know. Then don't rush, I said. Confusion is not a deadline. Silence lingered on the line. You're not telling me what to do. No. Time continued its steady march. He was promoted at work. He repainted his apartment walls. He started running in the mornings. He seemed lighter. One Sunday afternoon, he came over to my house unannounced. I was in the living room watching television, volume perfectly set. He knocked once and let himself in with the spare key I had insisted he keep. Hi, he said. Hi. He sat beside me. We watched in comfortable silence for several minutes. Then he reached for the remote. My body tensed instinctively, but instead of muting it, he adjusted the volume slightly lower. He looked at me. Too low? I listened. It was softer than usual, but still clear. No, I said. That's fine. He nodded. We can both hear it. Yes, I replied. We can? Later that evening, as he helped me wash dishes, he spoke without looking up. I've been thinking about dating again. I handed him a towel. How does that feel? Scary. Good. He frowned playfully. Why good? Because if you weren't scared, you wouldn't be aware. He dried a plate slowly. I don't want to lose myself again. You won't. I said calmly. How do you know? Because you've learned the difference between love and control. He absorbed that quietly. And if I forget, he asked. Then you come over, I said, and we'll adjust the volume again. He smiled at that. There was one more moment, small but significant. About 18 months after he had first moved back home, I visited him on a rainy evening. The power went out in his building. We sat in candlelight, listening to the storm. No television, no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just conversation. I used to think strength meant winning arguments, he said suddenly. And now, I think strength is staying calm when someone disagrees. I looked at him across the flickering candlelight. That took you a long time to learn. Yeah, he met my eyes. I'm sorry for how I spoke to you back then. The apology was simple, not dramatic, but sincere. "I know," I said gently. "I hurt you." "Yes," he swallowed. "Why didn't you throw me out?" "I thought about that." "Because pain doesn't excuse disrespect," I said, "but it explains it." He nodded slowly. "And because," I continued, "I knew the man you were underneath the anger." Tears filled his eyes this time. He didn't hide them. That was new. Eventually, life stretched forward the way it always does. He began seeing someone new, carefully, thoughtfully. He introduced her to me months later. He listened when she spoke. He didn't interrupt. He didn't dominate the room. He made space. That was the word. Space. The same thing he once tried to take from me, he now offered freely to others. And I understood something then. The remote control had never really been about the television. It had been about autonomy, about voice, about mutual respect, about knowing when to speak and when to listen. Years from now, I may forget the exact episode I was watching that night, but I will never forget the click of that mute button or the sound of my own voice when I said, "No, you are talking." Because that was the moment everything shifted. Not when he moved out, not when he paid rent, but when I chose not to disappear inside my own home. And now, whenever I sit in my living room in the evenings, remote in hand, volume set exactly where I like it, I smile. Not because I won, not because he lost, but because we both learned. Love is not about who holds the remote. It is about knowing that everyone deserves a voice, and that respect, like volume, must be adjusted carefully so everyone can be heard. But life has a quiet way of testing lessons after we think we've learned them. Nearly 2 years after he first moved back home, my son called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice carried a tension I hadn't heard in a long time. "Mom, are you busy?" "I can make time," I replied. He hesitated. "We had a fight." "With her?" "Yes." I waited. "She said I get distant when things feel too close, that I start acting like I need to win." Old habits don't disappear. They wait. "And do you?" I asked gently. Another pause. "Maybe." "About what?" "She wanted to rearrange my living room, move the couch, change where the TV is." I couldn't help it. I laughed softly. "This is not funny," he said, though I could hear the edge of a smile in his voice. "No," I said. "It's not. It's familiar." Silence. "I didn't like that she just started moving things." He admitted. "It's my place." "Did she ask?" "She said she was trying to make it feel like ours." There it was. The delicate space between mine and ours. "And how did you respond?" I asked. "I told her it's not hers yet." Ouch. "And how did she respond?" "She said she doesn't want to build something where she feels like a guest." The words hung between us. Growth doesn't remove conflict. It changes how we approach it. "What do you think this is really about?" I asked. He sighed. "I think I'm afraid of losing control again." There it was again. Control. The old companion. "Control feels safe," I said. "But it also isolates." "I know." "Do you trust her?" "Yes." "Then maybe this isn't about furniture." He exhaled slowly. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Make it bigger than the surface." I smiled. "Because it usually is." That evening, he called again. "I apologize," he said. "For what?" "For reacting instead of explaining." "And?" "I told her I get nervous when things shift too quickly, that I need to feel steady." That was honest. She said she doesn't want to control me. She just wants to belong. I felt something soften inside me. "And how did that feel to hear?" "Scary," he said quietly, "but good." He paused. I moved the couch. I laughed out loud this time. "Was it terrible?" "No," he admitted. "It actually looks better." Funny how that works. Weeks passed. Their relationship deepened, not perfectly, not dramatically, just steadily. One Sunday afternoon, they both came over for lunch. She helped me in the kitchen without overstepping. She asked where things were instead of assuming. At one point, I stepped into the living room and saw them both sitting on the couch, talking quietly. The television was off. The remote sat untouched on the table. Later, while she was washing her hands, he leaned toward me. "I didn't mute her," he whispered playfully. I raised an eyebrow. And I listened. I nodded. "That's progress." Life shifted again a year later. This time, it was my turn. I slipped on the back steps during the rainy season and fractured my ankle. Nothing dramatic, but enough to slow me down. The doctor said 6 weeks of limited movement. 6 weeks in which I could not climb stairs easily, could not drive comfortably, could not stand long enough to cook. My son insisted I stay with him. "I'll move the couch back if I have to," he joked. I agreed. This time, I was the one carrying a suitcase through his door, and I carried something too: vulnerability. The first night in his apartment, I felt unsettled. Different walls, different sounds, different routines. He had rearranged the living room again since I'd last visited. The couch faced the window now instead of the television. "The light is better this way," he explained. I nodded. That evening, he cooked dinner. It was slightly oversalted, I noticed, but I smiled and ate it anyway. "How is it?" he asked cautiously. "Perfect," I replied. He narrowed his eyes. "You're lying." "Maybe a little." He laughed. "I'll adjust it next time." Adjustment. There's that word again. One evening, while I was resting on the couch with my foot elevated, he turned on the television. The volume was low. He sat beside me. "Too loud?" he asked. I looked at him. "No," I said. "It's fine." He handed me the remote. "Just in case." I held it for a moment. It felt different in his home. Lighter, less symbolic, or maybe more. "I trust you," I said, placing it back on the table between us. He didn't pick it up immediately. We watched quietly for a while. Then he muted it, but this time gently. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Were you scared? That day with the Wi-Fi?" I considered the question. "Yes." "Of me?" "No." "Then what?" "Of losing myself." He absorbed that slowly. "I didn't realize I was doing that to you." "I know." He nodded. "I don't ever want you to feel small in my presence again." His voice was steady. I believed him. Recovery gave me too much time to think. I watched him move through his routines, work calls, grocery lists, laundry folded carefully, plants watered by the window. He had built a life that held him, not perfectly, but solidly. One night, as rain tapped softly against the glass, he said something unexpected. "I used to think you were just Mom." I smiled. "I am." "I know, but I mean, I didn't see you as a full person, with limits, preferences, boundaries." "That happens," I said. "Why?" "Because parents spend years making space for their children. Sometimes children forget that space belongs to someone." He looked down at his hands. "I don't want to forget that again." "You won't," I said calmly. "How do you know?" "Because now you've experienced both sides." He nodded. "Yes," he said quietly, "I have." When my ankle healed and I prepared to return home, he carried my suitcase to the car. It felt strangely familiar, but different from the last time. That time, he had left my house stronger. This time, I left his knowing something new. We are not meant to stay in one role forever. Not parent and child, not teacher and student, not even strong and weak. We rotate. We take turns holding weight. Before I got into the car, he hugged me, longer than usual, again. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," I replied, and this time, neither of us reached for the remote, because we didn't need to. The volume between us was finally right. The end.